This is Felt Recoil.
Hey. Welcome to the Felt Recoil podcast, number 82. My name is Kris Vermillion. Patrick Hulan is not here this week. Lazy. Patrick's getting married starting tomorrow. Yeah, that goes. It's like a 3-day process when you get married. So we took him out last night and celebrated with some friends and gave him a pat on the back and said, best of luck to you, fella. See you again, never. Because that's what happens when you get married. No, not so much. We did have a good time. So we're a day late with the podcast. This is going to be called a day late Scotus update. I figured I'd sit down for a few minutes, and if you're watching any sort of news, you're seeing that there's a lot of Supreme Court decisions coming down. Everybody's upset. The Democratic Party is sending emails out now saying that the Republicans stole a Supreme Court seat. And so when that happens, we fight back. So give us $3. It's really interesting that Keith Ellison sent an email, by the way, this week saying the only way to restore the American government is for you to give me money. And I find that hilarious. That's the big problem with politics everywhere. But I say that the great irony in this entire situation, where they're so panicky over the SCOTUS decisions and what Trump is doing, the great irony is that if the left would just join us in agreement that smaller government that has less authority in the individual's daily lives is what we want, there'd be no need to fear, because that's what we would have. Sounds like that's what they want, right? They don't want this government involved in their lives. Well, neither do I, and I didn't want their government involved in my life either. But here we are with Obamacare. And by the way, we got Obamacare because a seemingly conservative Chief Justice of the Supreme Court made the government's argument for them from the bench. So if you remember, the Obama administration was arguing before the Supreme Court that this was just a penalty. This wasn't a tax. They weren't trying to tax anybody. And then Roberts goes, no, wink, wink, it's a tax, and therefore it's legal because you have authority to tax people. You can't penalize. And they go, oh, yeah, that's right. So anyway, the Supreme Court is bunk. It's a bad idea. I mean, it's a good idea with a terrible application. It gave itself the authority of judicial review in the Marbury versus Madison case, and on I could go. But anyway, we're going to visit 3 of the most influential rulings that they've handed down this week. But first, we'll talk about our charity of choice, Operation Underground Railroad. If you're following the news at all, you've seen this 22-year-old who shall remain nameless, and I'm not going to name his charity either, but he started supposedly a charity to end child sex trafficking, and he has been arrested for doing that very thing. So it looks like it was a front. He was trading child pornography with people. They've arrested him and shut it all down, so I'm not going to mention any of it. But the point is, those are terrible, evil people, and they're out there, and the pressure is on. Child sex traffickers, human traffickers, these people who make a living in just extremely vulgar perversion. And Tim Ballard and his team at Operation Underground Railroad are out there literally stopping it. They're arresting bad guys, 500 arrests so far in the short lifespan of Operation Underground Railroad. And they do everything they do based on charitable donations. It takes about $60,000 for a mission to take place, and those missions usually rescue about 5 or 6 people who are being trafficked. So get all the details you need about them at OURrescue.org. OURrescue.org. Become an abolitionist. Join the fight with Operation Underground Railroad. Okay, this is going to be short. I'll be as brief as possible because I know not everybody cares about SCOTUS rulings like I do. I find them fascinating. I think case law is actually kind of fascinating, so I enjoy reading about them. It's hard to read them until you get used to the language, very much like the King James Bible. If you're not accustomed to the language, that's going to be a hard read for you. So I've tried to turn some of this into common language, and if you are into it, follow Scotus blog. Go find Scotus blog, and that's where a lot of this comes from. Okay, so the travel ban, probably the biggest one here to take a look at. The travel ban has been upheld. President Trump sued by the state of Hawaii, by the way, leading the charge against him. His presidential proclamation that required, and this is from the proclamation itself. You ready? So it required the Department of State to conduct a 50-day engagement period to encourage all foreign governments, not just the 47 identified as inadequate or at risk, but all of them, nearly 200, to improve their performance with respect to the baseline described in the proclamation. So the engagements yielded significant improvements in many countries. 29 countries, for example, provided travel document exemplars for use by the Department of Homeland Security officials to combat fraud. 11 countries agreed to share information on known or suspected terrorists. The Secretary of Homeland Security assesses that the following countries continue to have inadequate identity management protocols, information sharing practices, and risk factors with respect to the baseline described in the subsection C of this section, such that entry restrictions and limitations are recommended for Chad, Iran, Libya, North Korea, Syria, Venezuela, and Yemen. Now, let me interject here. So what they're talking about is they went to nearly 200 countries, and they said, we would like to make sure, as a national security measure, that we are on the same page for how we use identity management protocol and information sharing practices and risk factors so we can prevent terrorists from entering the United States of America. And a vast majority of the countries said no problem. But 7 of them, Chad, Iran, Libya, North Korea, Syria, and Venezuela, not going to do it. Not going to do it. Sorry. You're on your own, America. So this measure is meant to ensure the safety of American citizens on American soil. The left has played this as a Muslim travel ban, which really couldn't be further from the truth. It just so happens that a few of these are Muslim-majority countries. North Korea is not. Venezuela is not. But so what? So what? Chad boasts a population of about 12 million people, and just over 50% of them claim to be Muslim. Iran habitually executes homosexuals for the crime of being gay. Libya, we know what happened there with Kris Stevens. All right. North Korea, not Muslim, just crazy. And on it goes. Venezuela, socialists, communists, people are starving to death. They took everybody's guns, and now they're slaughtering them in the streets. So these are places rife with trouble, rife with terrorism, and we're not going to just let willy-nilly come on in to the American states and murder our people in the streets. Their countries' leadership have refused to play along, and so the ban is upheld because the leftists, Hawaii, went in and said this is a violation of the Establishment Clause. And so what they wanted to argue was the United States government, under this presidential proclamation, has now made a law, issued a proclamation, as it were, so not technically a law. They're favoring one religion over another because they're doing this, they've targeted a religion, and they're not allowed to do that under the First Amendment. The Supreme Court said that's bogus. That's not a valid claim. So there you have it. By the way, countries not on the list. Not on the list. Saudi Arabia, the largest contributor to the 9/11 attacks. We know that. It's people, Saudi Arabian people. Somalia, where they kill our people. Turkey, Jordan, Oman, Kenya, Afghanistan, Iraq, where we're at war. Their people can still come. Zimbabwe. And terrible countries all around the world with histories of violence against America and Muslim-majority populations, and they're not on the list. It's worth noting, okay? Hawaii argued that Trump's actions were in violation of the Establishment Clause. We covered that. So this is a big win for national security, and it's a big win as it sets a precedent that says political correctness will not outweigh the security of the American people, and that's what the state of Hawaii wanted, just FYI. So just keep that in mind when you're planning your vacation. So speaking of the First Amendment, another ruling that is phenomenal, I think, is massive. This is great news. Janus versus American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees, Council 31. This is a massive victory to the American worker, just a massive victory. And I know leftists say it's not. This hurts the American worker, but it's actually really good for the American worker. So if you don't know, this ruling overturned a previous Supreme Court ruling called Abood versus the Detroit Board of Education. So in short, what happened was the National Labor Relations Act of 1935 as amended by the Taft-Hartley Act of 47, allowed unions to compel employees in the private sector to pay union fees even if they didn't want to be a part of the union. So let's say you got 100 employees and 65 of them choose to unionize, and the other 35 say, well, we don't want to be a part of the union. Well, it is legal. You are allowed to unionize and then force those other 35 employees to pay fees into your union on the premise that, well, we're the only people now allowed to negotiate salary raises and vacation days and collectively bargain with the corporation. You're not allowed to do it anymore. We're the only ones that are. We 65, and so we'll speak for you 35, and you don't really have to be a member of the union, but you still have to pay the fees. So in Illinois, that was the case, and Janus was the employee and it's now extended to the government sector. Okay, so Janus was a government sector employee who was in this situation, and essentially the unions have to tell the non-members where their fees are going and how much of the fee they're having to pay. And in Illinois, it was 80%, nearly 80%. So if it was $100 a year to be a part of the union, they were charging these people $80, and you weren't even a part of the union. And then basically the unions got caught muddying the waters when it came time to be transparent as to where the money was going. And so Janus went to the Supreme Court and said, this is a violation of the First Amendment. I cannot be compelled to support political and religious causes with which I disagree. If I have a conviction against this, the government cannot compel me to do so, all right? And the Supreme Court agreed. So Illinois law would permit the public employees to unionize. And if the majority of the employees in a bargaining unit vote to be represented by the union, that union is designated as the exclusive representative of all the employees. Non-members required to pay what they generally called an agency fee, up to about 80% in the dues. So the petitioner, Mark Janus, was a state employee whose unit is represented by the public sector union, and he refused to join the union because he opposes its positions. And Illinois' governor agreed with him, although the attorney general of the state did not. And now Scotus says the procedure violates the First Amendment and cannot continue. Neither an agency fee nor any other payment to the union may be deducted from a non-member's wages, nor may any other attempt be made to collect such a payment unless the employee affirmatively consents to pay. So I think it's a huge win from the ruling itself, by the way. It says, unless employees clearly and affirmatively consent before any money is taken from them, the standard cannot be met, which they're saying if you agree to pay, you're waiving your First Amendment right. So basically, you're agreeing to terms and conditions, and I don't have a First Amendment right because I'm agreeing to be a part of the union. However, I haven't consented to relinquish that right, and so you can't stifle it the way you are. And I think this is a huge, huge win to anybody that's ever wanted to get involved in something like public education. Those people all unionize, and then they've really shot themselves in the foot because all we hear now are public educators whining about how bad the job is. Oh, it's terrible because I have to pay for everything. Well, it's a living, breathing example of the fact that when the government gets involved and compels people to do things, it will fail. It always does. What better example could there be outside of our public education system? Imagine if you were required to send your child to school. I don't mind there being a requirement to educate children because I think that makes us a better society. What I have a problem with is that I have to pay for someone else's child to be educated. I don't use the public school system. I don't think I should have to pay into it. And I think that's fair. I think that's fair for everyone. So for me, we homeschool in my family, and the state still requires that we join a homeschooling co-op that the state regulates. And the state says every child should be here at this age and grade, and they should be able to pass these tests and blah, blah. I'm okay with that. That's fine with me. But public schools are showing you that when the state gets in and compels people to do things, and when people believe that they can make a living off the back of the taxpayers, it's going to fail. Standards slump, as does performance. And here you go. You got the mess you're in now where these people claim that they can't even get the supplies they need. So just shut it all down. Start over. Charter schools are the future. Homeschooling is the new way of doing things. Let that be that, and get the government out of education. The government's job is not to educate you. It's not. The government's job is not to feed you. The government's job isn't to give you Band-Aids and provide you health care, and it sure as heck isn't the job of the government to educate you or your children. Okay? All right. From the guy with the public university education, but I digress. Okay, last but not least, I told you it's going to be short. We're going to wrap this up in 20 minutes. This is another First Amendment win. By the way, all of these, you see the theme here? They're all First Amendment victories. The Establishment Clause, and then no compulsion for free speech, and then this one is basically a religious liberty win. This one, it'll be interesting to see how this ruling out of California plays out in the gay cake schemes, of the future. So California had a law in the books, and what was the name of that law? It was the FACT Act. And it basically forced non-abortion facilities. So if it's like a pregnancy crisis center that doesn't believe in abortion, and they say, hey, we're going to walk you through the adoption process, or we're going to counsel you on being a single parent because we would rather you not abort the child. California law was forcing these establishments to inform their clients that abortion is a free alternative to their services. Scotus blog says, quote, the centers that have medical licenses must post notices that inform their patients that they may obtain free or low-cost abortions, and that include the number of the state agency that can connect the women with abortion providers. The centers that are not licensed must include disclaimers in their advertisements in up to 13 languages to make sure that their services do not include medical help. So Scotus says, nope, you can't compel them to do that. You can't make them basically tell women, hey, you can go get a free abortion. They're allowed to have their services, and the pro-abortion people are allowed to have theirs. So big wins all around. And in related news, Justice Kennedy is basically retiring in about 30 days. I think there's a few more rulings coming before he's out the door. And there were a few more this week as well, but these I thought were the big takeaways, and you're going to hear about these the most, so I thought maybe we provide a little bit of clarity. But Kennedy is retiring, and so there's a big scuttlebutt about the common refrain, and Patrick and I had this conversation of, well, maybe didn't we think Ruth Bader Ginsburg would go? I mean, that woman is knocking on death's door, right? So I see this as a best-case scenario. Look, Kennedy was a swing vote. He's not an established conservative. We thought Roberts was, but he's obviously not. He gave us Obamacare, so thanks for nothing. And Kennedy was not a consistent conservative constitutionalist, so that's a good go for us. Now, this being said, let me preface with, we can't be sure Trump will give us a conservative Supreme Court nominee. We cannot be sure. Don't even act like you can. Oh, he will. No. You and I both know. You both know that you can't predict the man. So don't be surprised if the left-leaning centrist comes in to replace Kennedy. And then we'll have to worry, but I hope we don't. Hopefully we get a nice, strict constitutionalist. But no way Ginsburg makes it through a second term, either for health reasons or just being tired. There's no way she makes another 7 years on the court. And I, by the way, tend to believe that if you die of old age on the court, you're part of the problem. You're part of the problem, okay? These people are 9 unelected officials who rule with an iron fist for life, and I hate that. I hate the Supreme Court with a passion. I like what it was designed to do, but it no longer does. It didn't do it for very long. It no longer does what it was designed to do, okay? It was actually never designed to say whether or not laws were constitutional. It wasn't, all right? You can read up on that. Maybe at some point we'll dive deeper into that. But anyway, all right, that's that. I hope you'll share this with a friend and let them know that there's information here if they need any clarification. If you have questions, you want to talk, you can email me, Kris, K-R-I-S, at feltrecoilshow.com, and we'd be glad to get in touch with you. Always nice to hear from you. We'll be back in full swing next week, I believe. I don't even know if Patrick's going on a honeymoon because I'm a terrible friend who doesn't care about him. But we'll get a full-on show going next week and have a really good time. Thanks for hanging out. This was episode number 82 of the Felt Recoil podcast. We'll see you here next Wednesday for another showdown.